Picture this scene. You're watching an influencer try to talk about a serious bout of depression, but looking at the caption, it reads like a riddle. Instead of suicide, they type unalive. Instead of depression, they use a cloud emoji. They are grown adults forced to speak like children, tiptoeing around an invisible tripwire, terrified that one wrong syllable will banish them into the void of the shadow ban. Now, cut immediately to a different scene. Mark Zuckerberg, standing on a digital stage, taking a victory lap. He is beaming, announcing that free speech is back, positioning himself as the hero standing up to government overreach. He tells you that Washington shouldn't decide what you see. But there's a jarring, almost absurd contradiction here. While the tech billionaire is cheered for liberating speech, that user discussing their mental health is still being silenced by his code. The algorithm has decided that a racial slur is debate, but the clinical term for a mental illness is harmful. This disconnect, where the people screaming freedom are the same ones forcing us to speak in emojis, isn't an accident. It's a symptom of a much deeper power structure. It suggests that the police isn't just the government, it's the code itself, and it was predicted decades ago, not by a software engineer, but by a French philosopher who realized that the most effective police force is the one that decides who is even visible enough to be heard.
That is just a perfect way to frame it. That contradiction you just laid out, it's everything.
It feels like the central tension of our digital lives right now.
It is, because it immediately pulls us out of that really tired, sort of simplistic debate we always hear. You know, the one that pits government control against corporate freedom.
Right, as if those are the only two options on the table.
Exactly. What you're describing is a kind of power that isn't, it's not being wielded by some visible state actor. It's coming from something much more fundamental, a symbolic order that, dictates who gets to be seen and who gets to be heard in the first place.
Okay, so let's really get into that. Let's unpack this, because I think understanding this concept is the absolute key to this whole deep dive. We're going to be leaning on the framework of the French philosopher Jacques Rancière. And he uses this very loaded term, the police, with a capital P. And I think defining that is crucial for understanding the digital world we're all, swimming in.
It is. It's the absolute foundation. And when Rancière talks about the police, he is emphatically not just talking about, the cops on the street.
Not the police with sirens and uniforms.
No, not at all. The state and its apparatus are part of it, yes, but the police is much, much broader. Think of it as the symbolic and institutional order of society. It's the social architecture that maintains hierarchies and, keeps everyone in their designated slot.
So if I'm getting this right, the police is the system that tells me where I fit in, what my job is, who I am, and even how I'm allowed to talk about it.
That's a great way to put it. It sounds less like a specific organization and more like the underlying operating system for society.
Yeah.
The core function of this police order is simply policing, assigning every person in every group to a fixed social position. It decides who has the right to even exist politically, who gets to be counted as a speaker, and who is, considered audible in the public sphere.
It's like the ultimate stage manager.
Exactly. Deciding where everyone stands on stage and what lines they're allowed to read before they get kicked off.
And the mechanism it uses for this is another one of his big concepts, the distribution of the sensible.
Yeah.
Or le partage du sensible.
Yes, exactly. The distribution of the sensible is the basic. The basic arrangement of how we perceive our shared world. It defines what's visible, what's sayable, what counts as a real argument.
And what's just noise.
And what's just noise. Or irrelevant chatter. Or just, an inarticulate cry of pain that you don't have to take seriously as a political claim. The police order assigns these specific roles. So an expert speaks in sanctioned jargon, a politician uses official language, but a voice from a marginalized community.
It only gets counted if it expresses its suffering in a way that the dominant order finds, acceptable, consumable.
Consumable is the perfect word. It has to fit the pre-assigned role.
So if the police order is what assigns all these positions and decides who's visible, then who are the people it tries to silence? Who are the ones who don't make the cut?
Those are the people Rancière called les sans part.
The part of no part, or those without a share.
Those without a share, exactly. They were the excluded, the marginalized groups who were subjected to a fundamental wrong. He calls it le tort. And it's an injustice because the police order just doesn't officially count them. They're not part of the political community, or they're limited to a really specific, often derogatory role.
And that's the core injury, isn't it? The le tort. It's that initial structural wound of not even being recognized as an equal person at the table.
It is, because if you don't count, you don't exist. And if you don't exist, how can you complain about the injustice being done to you?
Can we make this more concrete? What does this framing, this creation of Latour, look like in our world today?
Oh, absolutely. The sources we looked at give some really powerful examples of how this police order works through language. You see it constantly in global media.
How so?
Well, the police order dictates the verbs we use. So Russia invades, but America interferes. Israel carries out self-defense, but Arab countries are terrorists. Those subtle differences in verbs and nouns, that's the police order assigning legitimacy and status right there in the sentence.
The label itself fixes the person's status. It justifies their exclusion from an equal debate before the debate has even started.
Precisely. And in other contexts, it's the same logic. The police order might frame groups with these reductive, sticky labels. Indigenous people are primitive, refugees are illegal aliens, trans people are groomers. In every single case, a fixed, often negative label is applied.
And that label then justifies denying them equal rights or excluding them from the discussion altogether. They're locked into being the sans part.
They are.
So if that's the police, this vast structure of inequality, what's the counterforce? What is politics for Rancière?
Politics, in his view, is the absolute opposite of the police. It's the moment of dissensus.
Dissent.
It's the interruption. The moment the system breaks down. It happens when the sans part, the uncounted, force their way onto the stage and declare their fundamental equality. They claim their own visibility. He calls it the inscription of a part of those who have no part.
So politics isn't the day-to-day business of government. That's just the police doing its job, maintaining the order.
Right.
Politics is the disruptive event. It's the moment people stand up and say, hey, we are also here. We are also equal. And your whole structure of who gets to be seen is a lie.
It's an interruption that creates a temporary space where equality can actually exist. It shatters the established distribution of the sensible and forces the system to reaccount for those it tried to make invisible. It's loud, it's messy, and it is fundamentally a challenge to the hierarchy.
Which brings us right back to that opening scene. The influencer forced to use unalive and the cloud emoji. If Rancière's police is the symbolic order of society, then Silicon Valley's giant opaque algorithms have become the new digital police order.
The connection is so direct, it's almost uncanny. The code itself establishes the new distribution of the sensible for our digital public sphere. It decides who gets reach, who is seen, and who gets monetized.
The code assigns visibility.
And it determines, using its own bizarre hidden rules, what counts as harmful speech, the noise, and what counts as legitimate debate, the sanctioned conversation.
And it translates that symbolic order into cold, hard numbers. Your political status online isn't about laws anymore. It's about your engagement rate, your reach, your monetization potential. That's the new social position.
It is. A piece of content that triggers that algorithmic tripwire, even if it's a vital discussion about mental health, is immediately assigned the status of noise or harmful, and its visibility is just throttled, it's reduced to zero. That is the code enforcing the police order.
And the influencer using unalive, that's the perfect chilling symptom of it all. They've internalized the fear of the algorithm, of the shadow ban, and they are forced into this new language, Algospeak, that respects the code's rules. They have to speak like children to avoid being silenced by the machine.
And the irony is just, it's so rich. Because at the same time, you have tech leaders positioning themselves as champions against government overreach. They're fighting the old police force.
Right, the one they can point to.
But they are simultaneously running a much more pervasive, much more invisible, new police order. A digital police order based entirely on automated rules and arbitrary definitions that compels self-censorship on a global scale.
It really makes you wonder how that police order, operating so silently through code, is shaping the entire ideological landscape, especially in Western democracies that, are supposed to pride themselves on the free exchange of ideas.
Well, that's where this whole analysis of algorithmic policing really collides with the crisis of liberalism. Because what you see is that content moderation systematically shapes public discourse. It creates a kind of ideological bubble.
How so?
By silently excluding voices that challenge prevailing narratives. And this can be across the board, but one of the sources we looked at points specifically to how it can affect voices challenging, say, certain woke narratives in Western democracies.
So the filtering isn't just random. It has an ideological bent to it, reflecting the norms of the people who design the platforms. And that bent is quietly pushing out views that challenge the status quo.
Precisely. And this creates a huge contradiction right at the heart of liberal democratic theory. In the digital world, we're flooded with opinions. It raises the temperature of politics. It encourages us to form these really deep convictions.
We get more passionate, more polarized.
Absolutely. But paradoxically, the system still expects us to keep those convictions largely private, or at least to keep them within the boundaries set by the platforms.
So we gain all this conviction, but we lose any kind of real democratic deliberation. The system is designed to manage our disagreement, not to actually engage with it.
Exactly. I mean, the whole liberal doctrine relies on the marketplace of ideas. The democratic state is only considered legitimate if you have the ability to oppose the majority. And of course, John Stuart Mill argued that an opinion isn't really true until it's been contested and defended.
And if the algorithm is silently filtering out that contestation, if it's removing the dissenting opinion or the controversial view, then it's undermining the very premise that gives liberal democracy its intellectual foundation.
It creates this central, almost philosophical contradiction. Think about the classic Millian position on free speech.
That you don't ban false speech, you debate it.
Right. The idea that falseness alone is not enough to limit speech. This has been a cornerstone of Western thought for centuries.
The idea being that debating a false idea can lead you to a deeper truth, or that censoring it is just an admission of your own fallibility.
Yes. But here's the problem. The sheer terrifying scale of social media today, where misinformation and genuine malice can spread virally faster than any fact checker can even type. Does that mean we can't afford Mill's slow, rational marketplace anymore?
That's the argument, right? That the platforms have a moral duty to step in quickly, even if it means silencing some people by mistake.
And that's the critical dilemma the platforms exploit. They'll selectively adopt the Millian position when it suits them, claiming to be these neutral forums for open debate.
But then
in practice, they aggressively regulate whatever they define as misinformation or harm. And often, that regulation isn't based on verifiable harm. It's based on content that violates a rapidly shifting, platform-defined ideological consensus.
So the platform wears the mask of open dialogue, but underneath, it's acting as the ultimate ideological editor. It's deciding which opinions are legitimate enough to even be heard.
And it's often based on the political climate of the moment, or what's considered acceptable discourse today. So when the code silently excludes dissent, maybe it's content about the Israel-Palestine conflict, or skepticism about public health policies, or even challenges to specific woke narratives, it just confirms that the platform is acting as a gatekeeper, as a censor, as Rancière's police.
And that structural exclusion, that silent filtering, it inevitably creates a massive reaction. We're seeing it happen right now. If the system that claims it's liberating speech is the very same one that's restricting it, people are going to start looking for an exit.
Exactly. This perceived censorship is what we could call the noble betrayal.
The noble betrayal. I like that.
Users, especially, classical liberals and moderate conservatives who first saw these platforms as liberators, they feel fundamentally betrayed. They watch these platforms enforce a police order that's all about manufacturing consensus, not allowing for necessary conflict.
They realize that the centralized power of big tech makes them the perfect tool for enforcing an institutionalized police order, even if it's a corporate one instead of a government one.
And that realization is what pushes them to demand and to actively build decentralized, free speech-oriented digital spaces. The system is the police. So they have to build a new town outside its jurisdiction. Their whole mission is to escape the arbitrary rules of Silicon Valley and guarantee the kind of contestation they believe democracy needs.
It's this fascinating self-perpetuating cycle. Censorship breeds decentralization, which is itself a political act, an attempt to create a new space for dissensus. But this whole problem gets infinitely more complex when you take these universal community standards and try to apply them globally.
That's when you get the global information police order. And it operates under this veneer of neutrality, but at the end of the day, it just reproduces some of the oldest colonial power dynamics we have.
How does that coloniality show up in the code itself?
It's structural.
Yeah.
The design of these systems is overwhelmingly influenced by Western norms, by Western legal frameworks, by Eurocentric ideas of what is acceptable speech. And this embodies a colonial structure of power. It's this expansionist impulse to impose one single universal solution that completely ignores local, cultural, and linguistic realities.
So you have a system where human relationships all over the planet are being governed by code that's mostly written in California, based on the assumption that one form of knowledge, the Western one, is universal.
And that colonial appropriation is just reproduced wholesale on these modern platforms. The promise of an algorithmic utopia is completely undermined by an unchecked power that perpetuates bias and disproportionately harms already marginalized populations. That system is the global police.
And we have a really powerful concrete illustration of this from a series of interviews with Facebook users in Bangladesh. It's a harrowing look at how this global police order creates deep, arbitrary injustice on the ground.
The findings from Bangladesh they're stark. Users felt harassed. They experienced the platform's restrictions as severe, as punitive, unfair, and deeply unjust. And the first, most obvious injustice was that the community standards themselves were completely inaccessible.
Why were they inaccessible on a platform that's used by billions of people?
Because the guidelines are written in verbose, specialized legalese English. This is the coloniality of the code-made text. Users pointed out very plainly that all users do not know English well.
Of course not.
One person specifically mentioned the absurdity of it, saying, rickshaw pullers also use Facebook, and they won't be able to read the English guideline.
That's structural exclusion built right into the user manual. The very rules governing your speech on a global platform are only truly accessible if you share the language and legal culture of the corporation's home base.
And this lack of effort to make the standards accessible led to this deep, corrosive distrust. Users started to suspect that these long, complicated rules were designed that way on purpose.
To what end?
To shift the blame. For issues like the spread of misinformation during critical events like the Rohingya genocide, they felt the lack of clarity was intentional obfuscation. It was the police hiding its own rulebook.
And beyond the language barrier, it seems like the total lack of transparency made the whole moderation process feel completely random and, frankly, terrifying.
It was profoundly frustrating and deeply offensive. Facebook would often delete content or entire accounts and pages without ever telling the user what specific content violated the standard. You just get a vague notification saying you violated a guideline.
But not which one or how or what to do about it.
Nothing. It makes the platform feel like this inscrutable, capricious tyrant, the ultimate police presence, invisible but omnipresent, judging and punishing you without any explanation.
And the consequences were severe.
Incredibly. Content removal, profile deletion, restrictions on future actions. But the most damning symptom of this broken system was the complete failure of the appeal process.
How did that fail the users?
The participants reported all these anomalies that just confirmed the system was designed to be punitive first and fair at distance second, if ever. They would get the decision on their appeal after they had already served the full restriction.
So the punishment comes first and the verdict comes later. Maybe.
Sometimes they served the full restriction, even when Facebook itself later admitted the violation was a mistake.
Yeah.
And if you accepted the initial allegation, you often had no way to reappeal at all.
So you're punished probably by an algorithm error.
Yep.
And only long after the damage is done do you get any clarity if you're lucky. And I imagine if you have connections, you can just bypass the whole thing.
That's the tragic reality the research uncovered. The broken appeal process actually pushed users towards further exploitation. A few privileged individuals were able to get their restrictions lifted because they knew someone who worked at Facebook.
Of course.
It confirms that access to justice on the platform isn't institutional. It's based on personal networks and social privilege. It's an anti-police exemption for the well-connected.
So faced with this futile, unjust system, the Sans part in Bangladesh had to fight back. How did they resist this global algorithmic oppression?
They adopted what the study called an anti-program. And this is just a profound example of Rancière's theory in action. It's the marginalized group creating its own space for visibility by using intuition to try and reverse engineer the algorithmic black box.
It's digital resistance born from pure necessity. What were some of the specific workarounds they developed?
The main one was a local version of Algospeak, a kind of coded language. Users who suspected they were being flagged for sensitive words like Nazi or Hitler or Taliban, they started to break them down. They'd use a mix of Bengali and English letters with special symbols to write them out.
So they were deliberately scrambling the words to make them unreadable to the machine translation and flagging algorithms.
Exactly. Just to keep their political conversations alive.
That's a direct parallel to the Western user typing unalive. It shows that when the police order shuts down clear language, human creativity will always invent a new code to appease or confuse the algorithmic gatekeeper.
And they developed other strategies too. Many just stopped posting publicly at all, assuming private posts were safer. Page admins, who suspected that bad machine translation from Bengali was causing the flags, started adding English translations to all their posts as a defensive shield.
And the internal pressure this must have put on communities. I mean, what did group admins do when they were facing the threat of their entire group being deleted?
They adopted this grim, internal defensive tactic. It was an act of self-policing to survive the external police order. If a group got a final warning, the admins would temporarily remove the one admin who had approved the flagged content.
They sacrificed one of their own to appease the algorithm.
Yes. It just reveals the immense pressure the system puts on users, forcing them into internal compliance and sacrifice just to stay visible online.
It's a desperate tactical struggle for existence. So, after living through this system, what did these users recommend? How do we even begin to decolonize the code?
Their demands were a clear declaration of their equality. They focused on transparency, accessibility, and restorative justice. It was the definition of politics. First, they demanded accessibility. Concise, simple standards in local languages.
Not legalese.
No. They even suggested that platforms create short, informative videos explaining the rules and put them right on the newsfeed.
That shift from dense text to a simple video, that seems essential for a platform used by people with varying literacy levels all over the world. It acknowledges their reality.
And they demanded real transparency. They wanted platforms to tell them exactly which post violated which rule. And crucially, they demanded access to the guidelines that the human moderators themselves use.
To see the internal police protocols. If you're going to be policed, you demand to know the rules of the police.
Precisely. And instead of just punitive measures, what was their proposal for handling real violations?
I'm curious about this.
They advocated for restorative justice. Instead of just deleting accounts, they suggested creating educational courses on the community standards and making them mandatory for users who broke the rules. They also proposed giving people more time to appeal or to just delete the flagged content themselves before a restriction hits.
And if they deleted it themselves,
they expected the platform to clear the charge, to recognize their effort to comply.
That shows such a profound understanding that the goal should be to repair and educate, not just to punish. It's the complete opposite of the current police order, which is just punitive, opaque, and driven by metrics.
And it all connects right back to Rancière. Their demands are a declaration of equality. They're demanding to be treated as legitimate speakers who deserve clarity and justice, not arbitrary policing from an invisible Western-centric machine.
And when that justice is denied, that's when politics, the disruption has to happen. It's a reminder that politics isn't just about voting. It is, as Rancière said, fundamentally creative and dramatic. It's an assertion of presence.
It's a performative act of what he calls subjectivization, where the sans part claim their own existence. And the act often involves this deep paradox of pretending you are something you are not in order to become it. You assert that you are already an equal participant, even when the police order tells you that you are not.
You see this so clearly in these historical moments where the simple act of just being somewhere or doing a normal thing in a forbidden way becomes the entire political statement. It redefines the distribution of the sensible.
Think about the classic non-digital examples. Rosa Parks in 1955, just refusing to give up her seat on the bus. That was a direct defiance of the established distribution of sensible space, where the physical location of her body was politically determined by her race.
Or the Dalits in India in the 1930s, entering temples, using public water sources they were forbidden from touching. They were performing equality, asserting their right to a common space that challenged the deepest layers of the police order.
And even more recently, the Gilets jaunes movement in France. They all wore those legally required high-V vests that are in every car, and they used that mandated visibility to occupy public squares. They forced their presence into the sensible world through a symbolic adherence to a safety rule.
And now, in the digital world, we're seeing this theatrical dramatization manifest in all these new creative ways that are designed specifically to get around the algorithmic police.
A really powerful digital example is the #IamGay campaign on Weibo, the Chinese platform, back in 2018. The platform announced it was removing all LGBT content as part of cleanup.
And what happened?
Thousands of users immediately started posting with that hashtag.
So they took the very identity that the police order was trying to erase, the identity that was labeled harmful, and they amplified it collectively in a way that was impossible to ignore.
Exactly. It was an open rebellion against censorship, a pure act of dissensus. And it was so massive that it forced the platform to reverse its decision in a matter of days. It was a digital occupation that reclaimed visibility for the sans part by asserting their presence.
We've also seen this in protests against repressive governments, using digital platforms to share acts of defiance that started offline, moving the political act into the visible digital sphere.
The Iranian hijab protest in 2022 is a perfect example. Women publicly removed their hijabs, they cut their hair to protest morality laws, then they shared photos of these dramatic acts on social media, making their collective defiance visible to the entire world, challenging both the state and the platform's censorship at the same time.
But I think the most creative form of this digital dissensus involves creating a new kind of code, an aesthetic workaround, like we saw with the users in Bangladesh, but one that is now global and has its own history.
That is the ultimate digital theatrical dramatization, using the watermelon emoji.
The watermelon emoji.
This symbol has a deep history. After the 1967 Six-Day War, Israel banned public displays of the Palestinian flag in certain areas. So Palestinians started using the image of a watermelon, which has the same colors as the flag, red, green, black, and white, as a symbol in art and protest.
A way to express identity without breaking the law.
And today, that historical tactic has been revived online. Because posts with the actual Palestinian flag, or with certain keywords, can trigger algorithmic censorship or shadow banning. The algorithm acts as the police, making the direct symbol unsayable.
So the watermelon emoji becomes a digital act of politics, a theatrical performance designed to claim visibility through a symbol the algorithm doesn't recognize. It disrupts the police order's attempt to control what we can see.
Art itself can be this political stage, a form of visible disruption, but that often comes with its own severe risks, as the Malaysian cartoonist Zunar discovered.
What happened with him?
Zunar used Twitter to share these incredibly powerful political cartoons criticizing the government. It was a clear act of theatrical dramatization, but it led directly to his arrest under cybercrime laws for allegedly spreading misinformation and insulting the judiciary.
The act of politics was immediately and forcefully shut down by the state's police order, using the digital platform as the evidence against him.
So we have all these incredible creative disruptions. Rosa Parks, the watermelon emoji, Zunar's cartoons, all challenging the police order. But Rancière gives a really sharp warning about where these acts can end up. He calls it the ambivalence of the aesthetic regime.
What does he mean by that?
This is the ultimate danger to real politics. Rancière warns that art and aesthetic acts, while they can be incredibly powerful politically, can also end up neutralizing politics by turning genuine dissent into mere spectacle.
So the political fight isn't lost when you get banned, but when you get turned into a fun, shareable, and ultimately meaningless trend.
That's the consequence. The police order wins when the creative disruption is transformed into consumable, non-threatening content. A brief aesthetic flutter that changes nothing about the fundamental distribution of power. And the digital world is a machine optimized for creating spectacle.
The Ice Bucket Challenge has to be the most famous example of this. It started as a theatrical act to raise awareness and money for ALS.
It did. But very quickly, people started participating for the virality, for the social credit, for the spectacle of it. They would perform the act without ever donating or even really understanding the cause. The act was depoliticized, the drama remained, but the political substance just evaporated into a viral trend. The disruption became a fad, and the police order remained completely intact.
So the struggle is always between those two outcomes. Either you maintain the messy, disruptive suspension of the police order, which is politics.
Or you allow that disruption to be recuperated back into the aesthetic spectacle, which is where the police order wins. And the digital world makes that recuperation dangerously, almost instantly, fast.
This deep dive has really shown that the fight for digital freedom is so much more complicated than just a battle against government censors.
The core contradiction is just undeniable, and it is deeply unsettling. The champions of digital freedom are at the same time the architects of the digital police order. By using these opaque, universal, and punitive algorithms, they've built a global architecture that forces all of us into Algospeak and arbitrary exclusion. They are defining the new symbolic order.
And the struggle, whether it's happening on a segregated bus or in a Bangladeshi Facebook group or in a viral hashtag, it's fundamentally a struggle over the distribution of the sensible.
It's about who gets counted, what language is allowed, and whose complaints are recognized as legitimate speech instead of being dismissed as harmful noise.
And the persistence of politics, of dissensus, of this theatrical dramatization in the digital world is this continuous creative act. It requires users to be, as you said, time travelers in their own moment, using an old tactic or a new code to declare their fundamental equality against these massive forces of inequality.
The central, really knotty tension we've uncovered here is that equality never goes alone, and neither is inequality. Democracy isn't some fixed state that we achieve. It is the struggle about democracy. Equality is the dissensus about equality. This continuous creative conflict, waged every single day through code and through defiance, that is the true heart of the digital public sphere today.